is an RPG that released almost a decade ago, worth 200 hours of your time. Just because you're excited about Divinity. A game that is full of walking skeletal lizards, demons, explosions, giant bugs, cheeky humor, and really just a whole lot of fun. A call to divinity and, oh, so much blood. A game that is of course made by Larian, Divinity Original Sin 2. And this is Basket, and Basket thinks you should play this game too. Also, Basket just wanted pets and didn't give a shit that I had a YouTube video to record. So that's why she's here. Right. With the announcement of Larian's new project Divinity, there was a flood of interest in Divinity Original Sin 2, and over 170% peak on Steam interest that coincided with the Definitive Edition launch on PS5, Xbox Series XS, and Switch 2. No one will ever accuse Larian of not being very savvy when it comes to marketing. But if you have not jumped into Divinity Original Sin 2, this video is for you. Consider it part explanation of what we know and don't know about the connections between Divinity Original Sin 2 and Divinity, as well as kind of a little mini review that's spoiler free of Divinity Original Sin 2 to get you in the mood to go and play it, because you should. That's the too long didn't read of this. Go fucking play it. First, the most important thing to know, Larian has already told us that Divinity is not a sequel to these Original Sin games. It will not be directly following the events of Divinity Original Sin 2, something that led to a little tongue-in-cheek response from Michael Dowse, Larian's director of publishing, as speculation of Divinity Original Sin 3 had reached a fever pitch right before the Game Awards. Cheeky bugger. But, that doesn't mean you won't gain something from playing DOS 2. Take this line from Larian specifically in the press release, which says, quote, "While Divinity is a brand new game that doesn't require experience with previous Larian titles, those who've played Divinity Original Sin and Divinity Original Sin 2 will be able to enjoy greater understanding and continuity." In the FAQ for the launch of DOS 2 on current-gen consoles, they say there will be some continuity and even some characters from DOS 2 that may show up in Divinity. What exactly that means could honestly be anything. That doesn't necessarily mean living, breathing characters or even major roles. For all we know, this could be a damn painting on a wall. Larian is quite fond of putting paintings as Easter eggs after all. But it does at least add some small incentive, but without some giant onus that you must play or you'll be lost. It leaves the door open. This is an option for you. The story will be brand new. You can jump in without any knowledge of Divinity at all and be perfectly fine, but there will be nods and grounding for those who played the previous titles as well. Sounds like a good middle ground, a hard reset while still paying homage to their history. But one thing I do think will carry over, especially if you're coming into this having mostly just played Baldur's Gate 3 from Larian and not their previous titles, is the tone.
Such a pity.
Specifically, the harshness of choices the game often presents. Not to say that there aren't harsh choices in Baldur's Gate 3, there certainly are, but having played, well, 600 hours over the two of them, there's definitely some choices in Divinity Original Sin 2 that felt more cruel and rough to me. There's also, if you jumped into Baldur's Gate 3, you had literal decades of world building, not to mention just general understanding of fantasy tropes as your backing. Jumping into Divinity is a little bit different. Yes, there are dwarves and elves, but the elves eat flesh to consume memories, and the dwarves, well, they're dwarves, but they tend to stab you in the back a lot. Humans tend to be the biggest pricks in all the land, and well, maybe lizards or orcs. It's hard to say, really. There's an argument to be made for elves too, I think, honestly. You know, this is why I think it's helpful to play Divinity Original Sin 1 and 2 to get kind of an idea of what the histories are. You can gather so much about the tone and the feel of the world that you'll be going into. It'll give you a sense of the rich tapestry that Larian has been building over several games. Divinity shows you the tone of the world in all its glory and darkness and humor and light. It's a rich world that I think once you start exploring, you'll start to fall in love with, just the way I have after well over 200 hours. I think it's one of those things in general with fantasy, when things do things a little bit differently than the Tolkien-esque fantasy, it takes a little bit of getting used to, but I think Divinity is close enough that you'll start to feel right at home pretty quick once you get into it, once you start to understand the kind of the dynamics of the world itself. But the other important thing I wanted to talk about is combat. The combat isn't exactly what you'll experience in Divinity. We already know that because one of the key components of Divinity Original Sin 2 combat, one that sets it apart from Baldur's Gate 3, even though both are turn-based games, won't be making an appearance in Divinity: the magic and physical armor system. The system is an interesting one. I personally, even after nearly 200 hours, am not a fan. I understand why some people might be, especially with how it adds different ways to counter or be countered on different status effects, but the two things that really get me with this system are that it makes you think of 3 different number sets instead of 1 for essentially health bars, and that you kind of build your damage stacking around it, or kind of go into combat thinking of these numbers instead of the actual layout of combat itself. It's a unique system and one that a lot of people actually love, so don't let my opinion here sway you, because I'm just an opinionated little bastard that you're listening to on YouTube. But either way, this system won't be in Divinity, so playing DOS 2, whether you love it or hate it, it's not going to really pay dividends here. That's not really a great way to suggest playing the game. However, they said that Divinity will have ways to counter statuses. The rest of combat can take time to get into, but if you enjoy challenge, it provides you a very satisfying peak. Most of my time in the game was spent trying fights and failing and then retrying them. It's not really a game where you can go and grind levels or gear a whole lot, although within each act you do have freedom of where you want to go and can certainly end up in the wrong areas too early. There's a limit to just really how much experience you can get in a single area. Sometimes you just have to kind of get good and keep trying, especially in cases where I had to keep extremely flammable NPCs alive, who have a particular unwavering fondness for jumping headfirst into the nearest bonfire. You'll learn quickly about all different status effects and how best to utilize your team makeup to your advantage, as well as how to counter or get royally screwed by all the cursed fire on the ground seemingly freaking everywhere.
Are my eyes fooling me?
If you're coming from Baldur's Gate 3, as I'm sure many will be, DOS 2's combat will be a learning experience, but it won't be completely unfamiliar. In some ways, it'll be more forgiving. There's no need to rest to regain spells, for example. In other ways, it's harsher. Damage and difficulty spikes are harsher, and you do not immediately revive your dead companions at the end of combat. Although, I took a way around that, because in the Definitive Edition, there's a little add-on you can add that lets you do just that. You can revive your companions by clicking a button after combat is over, and I suggest it. It lets your camping rolls become basically the same thing as the mechanic in Baldur's Gate 3, where you finish a combat with one person alive and you can revive everybody. I do recommend it, just for ease. But the last thing I want to talk about is storytelling, companions, and a few major mechanics that will lead into Divinity. So I'm going to roll them all into one. First, the companions are truly interesting, and I think this is where you may get the most benefit from playing DOS 2 in preparation for Divinity. We don't know what kind of callbacks to the game we'll get, but just getting to know the cast of characters that make up the companions in this game is worth it. They have compelling stories that you get to explore as the game progresses, and in Larian style, you get to influence. And of course, there are romance options. This is not Baldur's Gate 3 level of romance, and there are no cinematics. This is an older, less polished Larian, so don't expect the same kind of experience of intimacy or wow moments or heart-wrenching performances, but the writing is certainly there and the storytelling is there. The main narrative weaves nicely with most of the companions as well, and of yourself, and I think it has some compelling hooks. There's some very Larian-esque things here that we may very well start calling tropes if they get repeated in Divinity, almost like starting the game on a ship and then a beach. But the more I learned about the world, the more intrigued I got. And like learning the tone, I think playing DOS 2 and learning its story will make you that much more excited about Divinity when it comes out, even though it's not a sequel. Just because you now have a touch point in the world, a new IP that you weren't familiar with before, you'll know about key historical figures and events and the way things like Source work. And some of the tragedies that happen within the game, some of the tragedies that you learn about, you'll actually get to see and understand, and you'll have that knowledge going into Divinity. And lastly, not quite as complimentary, but perhaps something that'll be in Divinity, we don't know yet, there's one system I really found that falls flat in DOS 2 compared to, say, Baldur's Gate 3, and that's the persuasion system, which relies on hard numbers rather than a chance system. Because it's a strict calculation based on your score against their score, you either succeed or you don't, and if you don't put enough points into the skill, you'll find yourself running into some walls or finding yourself unable to push for the outcomes you really want to. I actually found it to be a bit limiting in the game, where if you didn't invest in a certain way or build a character a certain way, you could not persuade, and I didn't really find it to be that engaging. I know some people may like the more clear cut of that. I just found DOS 2's persuasion system versus Baldur's Gate 3, which admittedly can be a little bit overpowered, especially if you're a bard or a warlock or just basic charisma class. Okay, you know what, honestly, they're probably a happy medium is probably what you need. So should you play it? Should you play Divinity Original Sin 2 before Divinity comes out in the next couple years? For me, the answer is a resounding fuck yes. I didn't have to cuss there, but I'm immature. It's one of the best CRPGs out there to play even without Divinity on the way. It's got great combat, compelling characters, a good story, and it holds up well even nearly a decade later. Divinity Original Sin is good, its sequel is even better, and you can see how it sets the groundwork for a masterpiece that would be Baldur's Gate 3. And not to mention, there's a musical and audio trick used at a specific point in the game that I found to be absolutely masterful, and it's truly memorable. Like I said, no spoilers here, so I can't show it to you, but when you see it, you'll know what I mean. That's not great content. Divinity might not be a direct sequel to this game, but I still think there's enough connective tissue there from what we've learned already from Larian's little tiny comments, especially on their little press releases selling Divinity Original Sin 2, that there is enough here that you want to invest. And sometimes we have to dig a little deep with some of these announcements that Larian makes or these interviews that they do because they don't give us a ton to go on as we wait. And there's one of those things that I think that some people may have not fully picked up on yet that actually was announced back when they were doing their QA about Divinity. And it all has to do with companions and how they may be different in Divinity than they were in even Baldur's Gate 3 or Divinity Original Sin 2. And that's something I covered in this video right here. My name is Redbeard Flynn. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope you go and play Divinity Original Sin 2 and have a absolutely fantastic time.
Gods, what is that?
Whatever it is, it looks dangerous.